In his remarkable complaint, Keenan claims that the United States government received enormous amounts of money, delivered in gold and other precious metals, from the Dragon family many years ago, and that the money was placed into the Federal Reserve System for the benefit and underwriting support of the dollar, which was to become and currently remains the global reserve currency. The complaint alleges a complicated history with many moving parts and scores of internationally known and unknown characters, the sum of which is that Keenan claims he was entrusted with billions of dollars in bonds by the Dragon family. These instruments were then stolen as two Japanese agents attempted to cross the border from Italy into Switzerland with them, contained in the suitcase you see in the image at the top of this article. Keenan claims that as the conspiracy continued to unfold, various high-level officials repeatedly offered him a bribe of $100 million to release the instruments without disclosing their theft to the Dragon family, and to allow the instruments to be converted to a so-called UN sovereign program wholly under the auspices, protection and umbrella of the sovereign immunity enjoyed by the defendants. Other defendants include UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon, former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, Giancarlo Bruno, who is identified as head of the banking industry for the World Economic Forum, Italy's ambassador to the UN Cesare Maria Ragazzini, Ray C. Dam, president of the Office of International Treasury Control, and David A. Sale, the deputy chief of the Council for the Cabinet of the OITC. Keenan seeks the return of the stolen instruments, punitive damages and court costs on multiple claims of fraud, breach of contract and violation of international law. He is represented by William H. Mulligan, Jr., with Bleakley, Platt and Schmidt of White Plains, New York. Interested? I encourage you to visit Courthouse News Service, as McHugh does a great job of summarizing the rest of the case. This is just an overview. You have got to be kidding me. Courthouse News Service didn't quite have the stomach to quote one of the most interesting paragraphs in the entire complaint. But I do. This is where the whole story really started taking shape for me. Upon information and belief, these bonds held by the Dragon family have values ranging in the many thousands of trillions of United States dollars, a relatively small portion of which is involved in the claims giving rise to this action. Each of these currencies, such as the DFFI Dragon family financial instruments involved in this action, was and remains duly registered within the Federal Reserve System, and are directly verifiable by the Federal Reserve through its efficient verification system and screening process. Thousands of trillions of dollars? You have got to be kidding me. As soon as I read that, I had to know more. Because I had enough information to be convinced that this was not a spurious lawsuit. I immediately lined up an interview with Fulford to clear this up. The bottom line is that the Dragon family intended for these bonds to be stolen. They represented only a small percentage of the overall asset base, all of which is clandestinely registered within the Federal Reserve and the Bank of International Settlements. Fulford gave an introduction to the story in this interview, and I then found out much more as time went on. This was an elaborate sting operation that has brought us to where we are today, where a vast international alliance of 117 countries now has a legal way to end the financial tyranny of the old world order. A staggering amount of informazioni have been working solidly on this case, every day, for over 3 weeks now, which in my current life seems like an eternity, given all the other balls I'm juggling at the same time. The amount of information to assimilate and correlate, and the complexity of fitting the pieces all together, is staggering. I have now been in extensive contact with Neil Keenan, the principal plaintiff in this case, as well as Keith Scott, who is also mentioned in the complaint. Scott is an expert in this utterly secretive world of trading between central banks, and is well aware of the vast wealth underwriting them, all held in the strictest secrecy. Keenan has never worked for any government or clandestine agency. He is a businessman who ultimately became acquainted with the Dragon family, the former ruling party of China, prior to the arrival of communism, and gained their trust. I have now personally surveyed over 300 different photographs and dozens of separate documents Keenan sent me, related to this case, including the now infamous Book of Maclumat. They are extremely complex, and extremely compelling. This all appeared after I conducted the interview with Fulford you are about to hear and read. This whole story is true. Devastatingly true. It is the single biggest real problem the powers that were have ever had. That also means it's extremely good news for everyone else. Lots of validation in one particularly remarkable case of personal validation. I emailed Keenan with a description from one of my highest-placed insiders about what the boxes that contained these bonds actually looked like. None of this information had ever been put online. Less than 15 minutes later, Keenan sent me dozens of pictures that precisely matched the description I had just given him. I was absolutely stunned. There is no possible way he could have faked something like that within 15 minutes. It is not yet clear whether I will release any of these images. The last thing I would want to do is to damage this case in any way, and it may also violate international laws, giving the loyal opposition an easy way to attack me. However, we do have at least one image that is safe to share. Here, again, is the photo released by the Italian media after these bonds were first seized. Let's not waste any more time. Here's the link to download the 98 meg, high-quality MP3 file of this stunning, 98-minute interview, followed by the transcript, which I have loaded up with links you can check out yourself. Part 2 is coming soon. What you've just read is quite stunning. But it still turned out to only be the beginning of the story. I was able to grill Fulford and get a lot more information out of him than I've ever seen before. However, once I made contact with the people involved in this lawsuit, I found out there was much more to the story than what Fulford has reported so far. In Part 2 I will give a proper historical overview of how and why these vast assets were seized and held by the Federal Reserve and the Bank of International Settlements. Beginning in 1921 with Emperor Hirohito's trip to the United Kingdom. This interview was truly just the beginning, and much of what has delayed me so much in getting this posted has been the process of doing all the follow-up. I decided to break it into 2 parts so you don't have to keep waiting. The timetable has sped up since our interview. It is also important to quote a bit of Fulford's 2 most recent blogs, as the latest actions by the United States have accelerated the timetable wherein the mass arrests may occur, that the United States Senate and Obama claiming the right to murder and imprison Americans without trial was a fatal mistake. December 5. The word is at the Pentagon. The agencies and the militias are on the brink of taking violent action against President Obama and the senators who claim the right to kill and or indefinitely imprison Americans without trial. DW, violent action may sound a bit too strong, as all he's talking about here is arrests at gunpoint, probably without shots ever having to be fired. The criminal cabal in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street may be able to pretend they are setting up a fascist totalitarian dictatorship in the United States for a while longer, but no serious armed group is going to support them. The same is true in Europe, where Freemason P2 lodgers and Bilderbergers will make a move towards fascist control this week, and will seem to be on the offensive, but will ultimately fail. The simple fact of the matter is that these fascists simply do not have any reality to back up the numbers they are putting into their financial computers to bribe people and hire bully boys. They are mathematically doomed. The awareness in the thinking part of the population of Western countries has reached a critical mass. The group that is sitting brainwashed in front of their TVs is irrelevant, because the contents of their TV mind programming will change once police and the military remove the criminals now occupying the corporate media. Anyone who still believes there is an ounce of truth or decency in the large corporate media establishments has to ask themselves why these organizations do not write 911 Truth or about the murder of 2 million Iraqis or about the vast bribes most top Washington, D.C. corporate government officials have received. They must ask why people are being railroaded into an agenda of war against Iran as a precursor to World War III more than anything else. They need to ask themselves why the so-called governments of the West do not make any serious future plans for the planet other than fomenting war. In signs of imminent revolution, the senators who voted to kill and imprison Americans without trial are being confronted in their offices by angry constituents. The military has told Obama to buzz off, which is exactly what he did by running off to Hawaii December 12. Even more information earlier today as I write this piece. Fulford just posted his next update into this fascinating, ever-changing story. Here is a small excerpt from his paid blog. Cabal struggles desperately to create fascist world government as multiple criminal investigations zero in on them. The fascist cabal known as the Bilderbergers, CFR, Committee of 300 etc., is desperately and without hope trying to start WW3 and install a fascist world government in an attempt to preempt criminal investigations closing in on them from all sides. Their efforts will fail because the Pentagon and the agencies in the United States, with the exception of Homeland Gestapo, are preparing to remove them from power, according to CIA and other sources. For example, multiple investigations are closing in on alleged President Obama, including one for illegally declaring war on Libya. A count among the United States representatives show the votes necessary to impeach him are there, the United States law enforcement officials say. In addition, evidence of bribery and other forms of illegally tampering with government is being compiled against George Soros, among others. There is also a lot going on under and on the surface in Europe, Japan and the Middle East and the United States. As mentioned last week, the Obama regime has asserted the right to murder and imprison Americans without due process.